It's 5:05 and welcome into a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Well, late last week, North Carolina State Auditor Dave Boliek announced a new bipartisan 22-member modernization of election data system commission, also known as MEDS, M-E-D-S. That is the acronym for this new group, with its goal to help bring North Carolina's election management system up to date. The executive director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections, Sam Hayes, announced the joint initiative with the state auditor Dave Boliek's office in October to solicit input on the state's election information management system, as well as campaign finance reporting software, both of which he said were outdated. The statewide election information management system was initially developed back in 1998 and is a central election management system that coordinates statewide election processes, voter registration, voter roll list maintenance, as well as reporting of election results. It is used daily by the State Board of Elections and by all 100 County Board of Elections, who are the ones that are actually responsible for facilitating elections that happen across the state. In addition, the campaign finance reporting software was developed by the NCSBE in early 2000s. That the state board is required to maintain both systems, and they do, with the North Carolina State Auditor's Office directing and supervising all budgeting functions for the state board. Developing a secure, user-friendly, and modern election management system that will meet the needs of North Carolina voters, election administrators across the state, and candidates is what the commission's goal is, alongside with assisting with a separate overhaul of the state's cumbersome campaign finance reporting software that will make it easier for the public to track political spending, for candidates to comply with rules and regulations, and also to reduce unintentional errors and omissions. The state auditor said in the press release late last week, "We have a deep bench of election professionals from all corners of this state, including professors, researchers, and election officials. It is important that we develop a secure, user-friendly election management system, and we will involve those who are on the ground and hear directly from North Carolina voters." Currently, both the auditor's office and the state board are working together on a three-phase plan to modernize the state election management system. They most recently issued a request for proposal, also known as an RFP, for the second phase of the plan, which was followed by an RFI, request for information, that gathered input from citizens and voters. This is the RFPs, RFQs. You may have heard those phrases or acronyms used before. They are the traditional way in which government solicits bids, contracts for pretty much anything that has to go out for bid. This new committee will review public comments, add perspectives through the development of the new system, with other commission duties including evaluating submissions and vendors, offering feedback on functional needs and user applications, making recommendations on the final proposal, as well as assisting enhanced security protocols and monitoring implementation. Dave Boliek will be the chair of the commission, which does include our very own Dr. Andy Jackson. He joins us pretty frequently here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. He is the director of the John Locke Foundation's Civitas Center for Public Integrity. We have talked to him about a variety of election-related topics and various conversations as it relates to elections over the last year and a half or so, with Jackson telling CarolinaJournal.com, "I am honored to be named to the commission and welcome to the opportunity to help with the next phase of this update. As a researcher who relies heavily on data from the State Board of Elections, I am acutely aware of the need for the board to release accurate, timely data to the public. Providing such data helps bolster public confidence in our elections." Jackson said that while they will need to work with board officials to formulate a final plan, some of the ideas for improved implementation include requiring most or all election committees to submit digital reports and tracking reports by elections, not just by year or committee. He has written extensively on the subject of upgrading this state system, including issues that showed up with Justice Allison Riggs, who through no fault of her own had 3 voter registrations listed in all 3 different counties, Wake, Chatham, and Durham counties. Other members of the commission, as I mentioned, do include Dave Boliek, who is the head of the North Carolina State Auditor's Office, Dr. Andy Jackson, some various election directors and board members from across the state of North Carolina as well. One other interesting individual you might be familiar with, Chris Cooper. He is a professor over at Western Carolina University, is very active in elections across the state of North Carolina. Non-voting technical advisors of the commission will include the State Board Executive Director, Sam Hayes, as well as Brett Kelly, who is the State Board's Chief Information Officer, or CIO. All 5 members of the State Board of Election will serve as ex officio non-voting members of the commission. So this group was just announced late last week, obviously still very much in its infancy stages, but some very important work to go on as this commission continues to work through this very important process of modernizing the technology within the North Carolina State Board of Elections. As soon as we get any additional information or updates for them, we'll pass it along to you right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. In some other statewide news this morning, ahead of the upcoming legislative short session, the Democrat-controlled North Carolina State Board of Education is asking lawmakers in Raleigh to raise school personnel salaries across the board while cutting funding for the state's very and increasingly popular school voucher program. This is according to a set of recommendations endorsed back on February the 5th. The pay increases wouldn't apply to public school teachers exclusively, but also the administrators and all certified and non-certified staff members within public schools, with the goal being bringing teacher pay to, quote, the highest in the Southeast, while restoring master's pay for all educators, according to the recommendation. Among other priorities, the state board is also requesting over $150 million to buy electronic devices for students in the classroom. Now, that would be over a 4-year time span, an extra $377 million for free school meals, $198 million for special education, $117 million for school construction, and $64 million for school health personnel. Adding all of that up, we are talking about hundreds of millions, more than $500 million worth of additional spending being requested by the State Board of Education. Meanwhile, the State Board wants lawmakers to put a moratorium, on funding for the state's school voucher program, which you may be familiar with. It's called the Opportunity Scholarship Program. They are requesting that the program offer no new awards to students beginning in the 26-27 school year. The proposal reads in part directly, redirect the funding appropriated for the new opportunity scholarships for the 26-27 fiscal year to address needs in our public schools. Future funding increases for the Opportunity Scholarship Program should be limited to annual percentage increases in funding for state public schools. The state board made a similar request in 2025, and Democrat Governor Josh Stein also called for the elimination of that program in his proposed budget last year. However, Dr. Bob Lukey, the director for the Center for Effective Education at the John Locke Foundation, said the Democrat-controlled State Board of Elections recommendations are not likely to get serious consideration by the Republican-led General Assembly. Some versions of teacher pay will likely get approved by the legislature because teachers do need better pay. The House has been far more generous on teacher pay raises than the spendthrift Senate, where a compromise fails. However, it is anyone's guess. According to Lupke, he said a moratorium on new funding for the state's popular voucher program is also not likely to happen, writing Governor Stein and his predecessors have both tied a zero out to the program. However, with almost 104,000 students statewide and support from nearly 64% of voters, it is safe to say that the Opportunity Scholarship Program is here to stay. The state board voted 8-2 to approve the funding request package, with Republican Treasurer Brad Briner and Republican appointee Olivia Oxendine being the only two no votes. The entire request would total close to $1 billion. But Briner pointed out that the projected increase for the entire state budget from the General Assembly would only be about $100 million. With Briner saying there is a lot more prioritization that I would want to see before we put this in front of the General Assembly. State Board Vice Chairman Alan Duncan, a Democrat appointee, said that the state needs to, quote, return our focus to teaching in the classroom, and by that I mean raising compensation for teachers and getting the highest quality teachers in the classrooms and administrators. The application period for the highly controversial Opportunity Scholarship Program is currently open for the 26-27 school year. That opened last week. You can read additional details on this recommendation from the State Board of Education, plus some information about the Opportunity Scholarship Program. All of that available over on our website, carolinajournal.com. Just look for the story headline, NC Board of Ed calls for personnel raises and voucher cuts. It's now 5:16 on the Carolina Journal News Hour, Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. We will head on over to the traffic center, get a look at the roadways on your early Monday morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Good.
It's 521. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour, Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. Coming up later on this morning, the House Select Committee on Oversight and Reform is inviting members, elected officials throughout the Charlotte metro area to testify on issues of public safety and violence that have been plaguing the city of Charlotte. Obviously, some major national stories over the last year or so. We saw this committee, interestingly enough, about 2 months ago, deal with some school districts with maybe some inappropriate content in the classrooms. To walk us through what we are expecting from the Charlotte officials and from the hearing as a whole, the editor-in-chief of CarolinaJournal.com, Donna King, joins us on the News Hour. Don, about 2 months ago, that hearing got a little out of control with individuals with some very interesting books in classrooms. What are you expecting coming up later on today?
I think it's going to be fireworks, Nick. I really do. I think that we got to tune in to find out, certainly, but there's some passionate feelings about this. Particularly, we were referencing that last committee hearing. Representative Brendan Jones was looking through those school books and just tossing them aside, trash, saying students should not be exposed to this. I think you're going to see more of the same in the committee hearing later today. But really, at the end of the day, what these lawmakers really want to find out is if some policy decisions, the way they've run their budgets and their operational practices in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, if those have led to a situation where the public just isn't safe on things like public transit or, just in the city. How have they been managing public safety and law enforcement in the city, and could it have put the public at risk? That's what lawmakers want to find out. And it really intersects with other efforts they have, figuring out on repairing systems of involuntary commitment. And some of these other, this public safety issue has tentacles in so many different parts of North Carolina. And as we grow and more folks move here, we get bigger cities, more population, more denser population. These are things that we really have to get sorted out in North Carolina.
I would assume public transit is going to be a large part of this discussion, Donna. We saw a report just last week from the Federal Transit Administration, the FTA, highlighting some 18 issues as it relates to CATS. That's the Charlotte Area Transportation System. That group is the one responsible for the Charlotte Light Rail, which, of course, sparked international news coverage in late August of last year after Irina Zarutska was seen on camera being brutally murdered by a known convict, a known criminal within the Charlotte metro area.
Really is what's at the center of this. And for anyone who's written the light rail, it certainly pulls you through wonderful parts of Charlotte, the South End area, lots of good shopping, lots of good restaurants, but it's also just so widely used and it's such a public asset. But there are no turnstiles. There's no one checking for tickets. There's no security wandering up and down. They're using a private security company, and I've ridden it many times and never seen anyone. And when you do, it's basically somebody with an orange vest looking at their phone. It just literally is not providing the level of safety, does not appear from the public's view to be providing the level of safety. So that's the big question. How are they managing public safety on the CAT system, and what steps need to be taken to ensure that it is a safe ride for the public? There's also instances, anecdotally, of things like, folks getting free passes when they go get help for, say, a soup kitchen or a shelter. Certainly, that's a great idea to allow the public to use it and to make it available. But that also means that there's not the layer of security that needs to be there if you're going to just have free tickets and have it be out there available for anyone. So that's what they want to know. How is this operationally and in budget and all these other things? What steps is the city taking to ensure that something horrific like this never happens again?
We've already seen the General Assembly take action against Charlotte area officials. There's state law, Irina's law, even some legislation back in the 2024 session dealing with Mecklenburg County Sheriff Gary McFadden, who for a period of time refused to honor ICE detainers, said that he felt that it was unconstitutional for him to hold these individuals. Lawmakers changed the law, then changed it once again, Donna. So I would suspect that depending on what we learn out of this committee hearing coming up a little bit later on today, we might see lawmakers come back and say, hey, we're going to change some laws and we'll kind of force you to do this stuff if you don't want to.
You're right. And I would expect to see Sheriff McFadden being on the hot seat in this kind of committee hearing, because there's not only been this pushback, he's become the symbol of refusal to comply with immigration law enforcement in North Carolina. The vast majority of sheriffs do comply and do cooperate with ICE. And now under House Bill 318, I believe it is. They're required to by state law. Governor Stein vetoed that requirement, and the North Carolina legislature overrode that veto, saying we want our sheriffs to do as much as possible to cooperate and make sure the public is safe. Sheriff McFadden has become the symbol of that that hesitancy to cooperate with ICE, and I think he's going to be on the hot seat for it. There's even been a member of his own party, Representative Carla Cunningham from his district, was among those who signed the petition to have McFadden removed. So there's a lot of pressure on him, and certainly there's going to be a lot of eyes on Charlotte, and the folks who live in Charlotte and all the folks who are moving there. Lots of business development announcements. This could give the city a black eye, and it's something that they're going to have to pay attention to with all the economic development attention that we're getting to our largest city.
Yeah, no question about that. And, Donna, it's great if the General Assembly can pass legislation, as you just mentioned, requiring sheriffs in all 100 counties to cooperate with these ICE detainers. But when the rubber meets the road, many of these decisions are locally made. And we just saw municipal elections in Mecklenburg County just a couple of months ago, and it seems like voters in Charlotte want more of the same. They overwhelmingly elected Democrats. Vi Lyles handedly winning that election, that are pushing some of these policies that citizens, I guess, claim to be outraged with, yet they're electing some of the same individuals that are still pushing for it.
Well, and that's the big question. Is it party loyalty or is it actual policy? And that's something that, we all have to look interior. Is this a team sport, or are we really interested in strong, sound public safety policy? And what does that look like? We're also watching in another hearing that the North Carolina General Assembly is talking about new policies and involuntary commitment. You're seeing cooperation across the aisle. So Democrat Governor Josh Stein saying that he wants to see more changes, signing an executive order last week about that. There's some things in there that perhaps may not make its way into policy, but certainly, that executive order saying he wants to see more cooperation between agencies so that we can prevent crimes from happening in the first place. One of the things that came out of the legislature's Committee on Involuntary Commitment was testimony from a Duke professor who said, look, we got to look back to 2001, when a lot of outpatient care and follow-up and all of the things that happen for folks who are struggling with mental illness, and have not committed a crime, a lot of that follow-up was left to MCOs, managed care organizations, that perhaps that follow-up wasn't done. And we need to look more at holding those groups kind of accountable when the follow-up isn't done for people who are struggling with mental illness, some sort of compliance and mandatory taking medication, those things, so we can keep people out of the prisons and keep the public safe.
Donna, you're really highlighting the big discussion here. This is multifaceted. There's not one single solution that solves some of the problems that not only Mecklenburg County, but we see similar things in Raleigh and Durham and Asheville, Wilmington, and some of our other cities as well. It is a multifaceted solution. We will have a complete coverage of this committee hearing over on our website, carolinajournal.com. We appreciate the preview this morning. Donna King joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:30 on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM WBT. We will get another look at the roadways on your early Monday morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick.
It's 5:37. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Charlotte's FM News Talk 107.9 WBT. Late last week, Governor Josh Stein signed an executive order aimed at strengthening North Carolina's behavioral health and criminal justice systems. This is after a series of tragedies linked to mental illness took place across the state. You just heard Donna King mentioning that in our last segment. The governor mentioned the murders in Charlotte, Raleigh, and Southport as he stood beside state officials, doctors, law enforcement, as well as prison officials during the announcement at the governor's mansion. The governor said in part, "Our hearts break for the families and friends who have lost loved ones. Of course, the vast majority of people with mental health challenges don't pose any risk. They don't pose a risk to others. They may not even pose a risk to themselves, although sometimes they do. However, a small minority of people who are experiencing paranoid delusion can pose a risk to public safety when their serious mental illness goes untreated." He called for more access to care and said that the killings have shown that the state system needs to work better for every party involved. The executive order directs the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Public Safety, as well as the Department of Adult Corrections and the Office of the State Human Resources to all work together to strengthen the behavioral health and criminal justice systems in the state. All of that with a focus on when people are in crisis in different stages. For example, when a person experiences a behavioral health crisis before any crimes are committed, during incarceration, and when individuals re-enter communities after serving time, in most cases, behind bars. Stein said that this co-responder model should be expanded to help when someone is in crisis. Normally, when a person calls 911, the police respond to the call. But the governor said that may take an officer away from fighting crime elsewhere. Instead, he would like to see social workers and mental health professionals respond to such calls instead, possibly having a social worker at 911 centers working with operators to determine who should answer the call. The governor is also calling for the strengthening and relationship building between 911 and 988, which is the suicide and crisis hotline. That line, baked right into its name, is intended to divert mental health calls away from the traditional 911 system, and that there is more awareness of 988 and 988 to the general public. The governor also stressed the state's involuntary commitment process, which he says needs to be improved, saying in part during last week's press conference, "Involuntary commitment is a needed resource for folks who are struggling with mental health issues or substance use who might hurt themselves or others." And voluntary commitment, or IVC, as it's known, those petitions are increasing, but we don't have enough beds to treat all of the people who need them. So I'm directing the Department of Health and Human Services to consult broadly and to recommend IVC reforms for the state. I applaud the efforts by the House IVC Committee and the North Carolina Collaboratory. A House Select Committee on Involuntary Commitment and Public Safety did meet just back a couple of weeks ago to discuss the mental health system in North Carolina, specifically outpatient commitment versus inpatient commitment, both involuntary and voluntary commitment, and what can be done to improve outcomes and actually get individuals the help that they need. Stein has also called on the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Adult Corrections to collaborate on standardizing and improving the state's existing treatment management program within the Department of Corrections, which would include DPS Public Safety and DHHS, to provide recommendations on creating a juvenile-specific mental health crisis program unit, which would be, of course, just for youth within the DPS or DHHS population. The governor noted that 75% of people entering the prison system have a substance use issue, 40% have mental health issues, and those numbers are even higher for juveniles, with 98% having at least one mental health diagnosis, which seems like an incredibly high number that the governor stated last week. Eventually, 90% of those who are incarcerated will leave prison, making it imperative, the governor said, to get treatment while they are still behind bars. Governor Stein said that re-entry support needs to be strengthened as well once people do leave prison, saying that at least 18,000 people will leave the state prison system this year and begin the process of assimilating back into normal life and into the community. Noting that if people do not have the support that they need in place when they get out, it's all the more likely that they'll be repeat offenders that led them to getting incarcerated in the first place. The governor said, "I'm directing the Department of Adult Corrections and DHS to recommend strategies on improving and expanding support for people with mental health conditions who are leaving custody, whether it's getting them connected to a healthcare service provider, housing, or job opportunities. These strategies will further the state's ongoing Re-Entry 2030 goals." The executive order also directs the Office of State Human Resources to work with Adult Corrections, DHHS, and the Department of Public Safety to identify and expand recruitment efforts, implement retention programs, address staffing shortages, and make policy recommendations, including increasing pay for workers in public safety, behavioral health, law enforcement, and the correctional system. With Governor Stein noting, at the Department of Adult Corrections, we have seen a vacancy rate of nearly 50% for correctional officers. 1 out of 2 positions are unfilled, and it shouldn't be a surprise, frankly, when starting salaries for correction officers in North Carolina is the 49th in the country. At DHHS, even though there is a long wait list of people needing inpatient care, North Carolina is a quarter of our inpatient units that could serve as many as 300 people sit empty simply because we do not have the staff to serve them. The governor, while complimentary about the finding common ground with the legislature on several issues, reiterated the need for the General Assembly to fully fund Medicaid, as he had done late last year before legislators went home without a new budget being in place. Senate Leader Phil Berger, the Republican from Rockingham County, and House Speaker Destin Hall, the Republican from Caldwell, issued a joint statement in November saying that Stein's demand was unconstitutional and unnecessary. Legislators at the time noted when they allocated an additional $600 million to address the Medicaid rebase that DHHS decided to use $100 million of that to cover administrative costs, not services that they were set to actually be providing. They also cited public comments from the Department of Health and Human Services Secretary acknowledging that Medicaid funding was sufficient for Medicaid to operate uninterrupted until April of 2026, which as of right now is not very far away. Lawmakers are expected back in Raleigh sometime, likely after the primary election coming up here in early March. Kelly Corsby, the director of the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Use Services, said that the executive order signed by the governor will build upon initiatives that DHHS has already taken, including opening of 6 new behavioral health urgent care centers, a new community crisis center, 2 new peer outreach centers, 4 new co-respondence teams, and have expanded a program called Mobile Outreach Response Engagement, as well as Stabilization, which is a crisis team specifically for adolescents and their families, as well as additional programs. So like anything else that we talk about in state government, many of these executive orders do come with some dollars tied to them for some of these programs to be beefed up, whether we're talking about things within the Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Public Safety, Adult Corrections, or State Human Resources. Many of these things would require some dollar amounts behind them. We will see as the General Assembly gets geared up to come back into session in likely about a month or so, whether they take some of what they agree with the Democrat governor and Josh Stein with and turn that into some sort of state law through a mini budget or some other sort of legislative process. We will keep a very close eye on that as the discussion over mental health, behavioral health, and how that relates to public safety is set to be likely a main topic of conversation today during the House Select Committee on Oversight and Reform, in which Mecklenburg and Charlotte leaders will be there in front of the Legislative Committee. Individuals like Mayor Vi Lyles, Sheriff Gary McFadden, and more. That happens at 9 o'clock this morning. We will have complete coverage of that over on our website, carolinajournal.com. And, of course, I'll have the latest coming up for you tomorrow morning right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:47 on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. We will head back to the traffic center, get another look at the roadways, not the runways, on this early Monday morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick, but we're close to the run.
The John Locke Foundation's Carolina Liberty Conference is coming to Raleigh February the 27th and 28th. The event brings together policymakers, scholars, community leaders, and citizens from across North Carolina to explore the challenges and opportunities of advancing freedoms in today's political and cultural climate. The 2026 Carolina Liberty Conference happens February 27th and 28th at the Starview Hotel in Raleigh. This year, like many other organizations, we will be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution with phenomenal guest speakers like Lord Daniel Hannan, Chief Justice Paul Newby, State Auditor Dave Boliek, and more. You can register and get your tickets for the 2026 Carolina Liberty Conference today at johnlocke.org. That's John Locke, JOHNLOCKE.org. Look forward to seeing everybody at the 2026 Carolina Liberty Conference. It's now 5:54 on the Carolina Journal News Hour, Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 WBT. Early voting kicks off this week across the state of North Carolina. The state has one of the lengthiest early voting periods anywhere across the nation, and there was a legal challenge that we've been walking you through the last couple of weeks involving some college students, and we are learning this morning that a federal judge has denied the college Democrats' request for an injunction that would have mandated early voting sites on 3 North Carolina public university campuses. The injunction, quote, would risk causing voter confusion, according to the court order, which was issued late in the day on Sunday. The College Democrats of North Carolina and 4 individual students working with Democrat operative Mark Elias's law firm sought to have early voting sites added to the universities of North Carolina at Greensboro, North Carolina A&T State University, and Western Carolina University. According to U.S. District Judge William Olstein's 14-page order, he says, first, based on the preliminary factual record before it, this court cannot find that the plaintiffs have established standing such that this court can grant a preliminary injunction relief that they seek. Olstein also labeled the request for injunction problematic because mandating the early voting sites would require action from 3 campuses, and those campuses are not part of the College Democrats' lawsuit against the state or the local election boards. With Olstein writing, those universities are independent entities that are not party to this case and not subject to this court's equitable powers. The court order also invoked the Purcell principle, which says federal courts ordinarily should not enjoin a state's election law in periods close to an election. And we talk about close. Early voting kicks off here in just a couple of days across North Carolina. With Osteen writing, the 2026 primary election is close at hand, with the early voting period starting in less than a week and election day less than a month away. Among other potential disruptions or unfair consequences, this court would risk causing voter confusion were it to issue a preliminary injunction right now. This hearing, these oral arguments took place last Thursday, so 1 week ahead of the early voting period, and we now have the decision from the judge in this, U.S. District Judge William Olstein, with his 14-page order. We've got a link to that over on our website this morning at carolinajournal.com. We'll have more about early voting as we continue through the week. That's going to do it for a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 WBT.